Hey, happy Tuesday and welcome back to Pathfinder. On episode 12, our guest is Emiliano Kargieman, the CEO and co-founder of Satellogic. Emiliano's been building satellites at Satellogic since 2010 and took the company public in January. Over the last 25 years, Emiliano co-founded 3 other companies, working in cybersecurity, software, and also having a brief stint in venture. Emiliano has also consulted for the World Bank and has a formal background in number theory and philosophy. Same. We go the distance in this conversation from Earth observing satellite fleets, tech stacks, the trials and tribulations of SPACs, small launch market, and much more. But I'll shut up so you can hear more about it directly from someone smarter than me. Before we do that, though, a word from today's sponsor. Our reliance on satellites for navigation, communications, commerce, and intelligence has grown exponentially in the new space economy. Unfortunately, the risks have grown as well, and the need to prioritize cybersecurity around space assets is critical. Spider Oak Mission Systems builds space cybersecurity products for military, commercial, and civilian operators. Their Orbit Secure solution is the first to deliver zero trust security to zero gravity environments, protecting space communication, command, control, data transmission, storage, and integrity to data level. To learn more about Orbit Secure, check out their website at spideroak-ms.com. Now let's dive into Pathfinder 12 with Satellogic CEO Emiliano Kargieman. Emiliano, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Where are you calling in from today? Because I know you have offices all over the world.
Yeah, I'm in my old office in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And they kind of dismantled it already. There's a few things.
Yeah. What's that satellite? Is that a satellite on that shelf behind you?
I think that's a model of a space station.
Oh, it's a model of a space station. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So where are you based? You know, I know you, and I'd actually be great if you could walk listeners through where all your offices are. And then what I'm curious about is like how you split time between all of them.
Sure. I'm currently based in Europe. I'm based in Barcelona and Spain. We have a team there of around 50 people in Barcelona, and most of the C-suite of the company sits in Barcelona today. We have a large operation here in Buenos Aires. In Argentina, in general, we have around 200 people probably. Most of the satellite design and engineering is done here, and this is where we started. We then have a manufacturing facility, we call it a pilot plant, pilot manufacturing facility across the border from Argentina, across the river in Uruguay and Montevideo. Then we have a team in the US. Most of our back office is in the US, or CFO sits there. We also have a large business development and sales team in the US, and we have separately our Satellogic North America subsidiary, which is also US focused. And then the team in Barcelona that I mentioned, and we are setting up a high throughput manufacturing facility in the Netherlands, close to Rotterdam. So that's, I think, the final location. Then we have people all around the world because now, thanks to work from home, we have people in a very large number of cities around the planet enjoying a good life.
Right. So what functions of, when you're talking about, you know, operating a constellation and the bread and butter of what Satellogic does, what functions can be done remotely, and what, obviously, you know, like assembly, integration, manufacturing, you need to be co-located for that. But to your point, you know, there are a lot of aspects of this that you don't necessarily, we don't need to be face to face to do a good job and be productive.
Yeah, I think, look, anything that's screwing things together and plugging, cables and things like that, you need to be on site, right? And keeping our manufacturing going through the pandemic was, complicated and all those things, right? And that needs to be inside. For the rest of it all in principle can be remote, right? We obviously have inner engineering side where we do satellite design, part of the engineering, you do need in some things access to a lab, you need access to electronics, you need access to, optical equipment or stuff that we're a completely vertically integrated company. So we design all these different things, the electronics, the sensors, the cameras, the telescopes and so on. So that requires equipment that typically requires at least people to go to a central location every once in a while. But the reality is we were pretty distributed before the pandemic, and throughout the pandemic, we really transitioned very, very easily into, people moving around and floating around a lot. I miss, being in the same room with all of my company, but I think those days, in a sense, are gone. Right? We have a large team, and so when I have the opportunity to visit, I come to Buenos Aires maybe a couple of times a year, and I go to Uruguay maybe a couple of times a year, and I go to the Netherlands a couple of times a year, and so on. It's great to meet people, and also gives the excuse of people I meet with them, and they're like, "Oh, who are you? I met you."
So stepping back a second, and then we'll return to some of the topics that we've already touched on, including my favorite buzzword of the space industry, vertical integration. But we'll set that aside for a second. How did you get into space, and what were the key experiences or education, or just parts of your life journey that got you to where up to founding a space company?
Yeah, I guess completely by chance, right? Like I'm originally from Argentina. I grew up not very far from where I'm sitting today. When you were growing up in Argentina in the late 70s, early 80s, you didn't think about aerospace as a career path, right? Like it was something that was done somewhere else, right? So I never thought about aerospace. I wanted to be a mathematician. That was my goal in life. That's why I studied in school. I'm a frustrated mathematician for all it's worth. But I also...
You're a reformed mathematician.
Reformed, yes. I've been building technology and technology companies all of my life. Right? I taught myself to program computers when I was 9 years old. I started my first software company when I was 15 years old, and ended up hiring a bunch of my high school friends. I started my first information security company when I was 19, and that was my area of expertise. At the time, I spent a lot of my teenage years hacking into computer systems to learn how computers worked. And
what were you a white hat or a black hat?
Yes.
I'll take it.
But in 20, when I was 19 years old, I actually started an information security company, and it began to be kind of my career path. We ended up bringing that company to around 450 people around the world. We were doing, tens and tens of millions of dollars in revenue. 80% of Fortune 500 companies were customers. We built, automated penetration testing software. So basically software that allowed people to break into their own computer systems and figure out where the problems were. And that did, it was great. I spent like 12 years building that company. And it was an amazing experience. I learned a lot about technology, about building technology companies doing that. Then I jumped into the other side of the table, to the dark side, and I started a venture capital firm. And I did early stage investment in tech companies for 4 years, roughly, and hated probably every minute of it. Right, it was like one of the most frustrating experiences in my life to invest in other people. Not because I don't like investing in other people, but it was very frustrating. I was trying to jump to the other side of the table all the time, right? I was like having a hard time, taking a back seat. And
you already had the entrepreneurial bug, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's the only thing I've been doing all my life, right? I never held an honest job. It was basically all companies that I started, and that's what I've basically been doing. So at some point after I got tired of investing in other people's businesses, I decided to start a new company. And I really was looking at, the intersection between food production and distribution and energy generation and distribution, and how we manage natural resources to do those things in a way that, we don't kill, the resources of future generations. And that got me thinking about how we collect data of what's happening in the world. And that got me to realize that we should be able, in the 21st century, we should be able to build an infrastructure to figure out what's happening on planet Earth. And when I started thinking what that infrastructure looked like, that's what got me to space, right? I started to look at satellites as a way to collect data around the planet. I started to realize that every way we had of collecting data around the planet is very difficult to scale and very expensive inherently. But satellites, to me, were in particular a good position to do this in a way that made sense. And the only problem then was, maybe you had to go and build satellites that were 1,000 times less expensive than what people were doing at the time. And that's what got me down the rabbit hole.
One, it's interesting for me. I think there's a commonality between what you're saying and what some past guests have said, just in terms of like not a non-linear path or moving laterally into aerospace. And I think that's pretty fascinating. But more so, it's good to hear sort of that experience and credentials and the bona fides leading up to Satellogic. And now, why don't you, in 60 seconds or less, if you can, just tell us the story of Satellogic from inception, maybe up to 2020 or so, and then we'll dig in from there.
Well, it started with this idea, right? The idea that we could build a more efficient way to see what's happening on Earth, and to do that, the vision was the same from the very start. The goal was to remap the entire surface of the planet at high enough resolution and high enough frequency that we could deliver this data to everybody in the world at the right price point, right? But to remap the Earth in high resolution, you need to put a bunch of satellites in orbit. And, high resolution Earth observation satellites were around $500 million a piece when I started thinking about this in 2010. So we needed to figure out a way to build satellites for significantly small cost, right? So the first 8 years of the company, I think, were the story of how we got to the unit economics of the satellites, right? How we got to build satellites that are $500,000 in bill of materials that we can put in orbit for a fully loaded cost that's less than $1 million, and that can, image the Earth continuously at sub-meter resolution, right? That took us a long time. We had to develop new camera technology to do it. We had to become a completely vertically integrated company, to use the phrase that we like, but basically meaning we had to go and build everything that goes into our satellites to reach our cost targets, and then we had to put this technology in orbit and make it work over several generations. That got us to roughly 2020, at a point where in 2020 actually we did what we call a dedicated launch, which is we filled one rocket with 10 satellites and put 10 satellites in orbit at the same time. And we went from...
Who'd you launch with?
That was a Long March rocket.
Okay.
So that was launched from China, actually. And that got us to a point where, we went from, we had a few prototypes in orbit validating the technology, to we actually have a constellation of satellites out there that are starting to collect data over all of the Earth every single day.
I think the CapEx conversation here, which we'll touch on later more, I think it's pretty fascinating, and I'm glad that you already have cited some numbers. Just for the audience, what are some other sort of specs, I think, that speak to the tailwinds driving your business and some of your peers and counterparts? And so I'm talking more, you've talked about price, but what about form factor, that sort of thing, like the overall size of these satellites?
Sure. Or satellite. Yeah, sure. So our satellites are around 42 kilograms. That's 80 pounds, let's say, something like that. They are roughly the size of a small wine fridge, right? They're extremely efficient in the way they're built, right? They're, at 40 kilograms, we're probably around half to a third of the mass of comparable platforms, right? That has to do also with this idea of vertical integration and being able to make trade-offs in design, and also reduces our launch cost for sure. I think the most important thing of the satellites, which is, there's two things I say are very, very unique. One is the image quality that we get from our camera design, from our technology. So we are best of class imagery for any small platform, right? And this is, the NGA did their own kind of Olympics of imagery, and they gave us the gold medal for image quality, right? But then the U.S. Geological Survey did their own analysis of our imagery, independent analysis of our imagery, and you see the published results, and we're literally, significantly better than any other small satellite provider, but actually match a lot of the numbers of significantly more expensive platforms like Maxar's, World E3, and so on, right? So quality is one of the characteristics that sets us apart. And the other one is exactly the unit economics, right? It's the CapEx cost. So or satellites are very low cost, but also they collect, they're not only maybe 10 times lower cost than other small satellite platforms that collect high resolution imagery, but they also collect 10 times more data, right? So when you look at our cost of acquiring a square kilometer of data in the ground, we're probably around 100 times better unit economics than any other company on the planet today. And that is the second thing that we have going for us. It's like really, really good image quality, right? Best of class image quality and significantly lower cost of data acquisition. So those two things are, I always say two of the three legs in the stool that we need to own our portion of this market, right? And the third one for us is just priding ourselves in delivering the best possible service to our customers, right? And being very flexible in how we manage it.
So when we first spoke, and this was a few months ago, I think I want to say May, maybe, you touched on, Satellogic's mission is creating a live catalog of Earth and doing so on a daily basis in a global scale. And some of the comments that you made to me, and you've actually almost touched on it here, but just the cost of collecting observations when you're looking at, competing options on orbit, but even more importantly, a lot of what you are trying to do, what Planet's trying to do, like on the scale they're trying to do it, like no one has really done it before. And like the alternatives, I suppose, would be like aerial imagery or as you said to me, I think in situ, like sending someone out to a site to make some sort of observations. So it seems fairly intuitive as to why, if you could get something on orbit and do so at a low enough cost, that this would just be orders of magnitude cheaper. But I want to hear it from you and, what the alternatives are maybe for a lot of your customers who are coming into EO, Earth observation, for the first time. And previously were like flying like Cessnas or drones or something.
No, and you're absolutely correct. This was the kind of the original insight when we started the company, was the fact that the biggest driver of cost for collecting data around the world is not the cost of the platforms. It's not the Cessna is expensive, and the satellite is expensive, but it's actually the opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't matter how you're collecting data in the planet, right? But if you're flying a Cessna, in one particular flight path, you're not flying it somewhere else, right? If you're sending a drone to one particular location, you're not sending it somewhere else, right? If you send a crew, to go take a measurement in the ground and report what they see, right? You have to pick where you send them. So if you, collect data in one place, you're not collecting data in many other places. This inherent opportunity cost is the single most important factor in the cost of data acquisition.
Yeah.
Right. You have to decide ahead of time what you're going to focus your resources on, right? Where you're going to go. And the same thing happens with satellites, by the way.
With tasking?
Right? If you're pointing a high resolution imaging satellite, you're tasking the satellite to go collect data somewhere, right? You're not collecting somewhere else. What this means is that, there's a set of applications that you can serve at the opportunity cost of each of these technologies, right? And for satellites in particular, what happens is you end up in a situation where high resolution satellites are only used to serve, or mostly used to serve, defense and intelligence customers, because these are the guys that can pay the opportunity cost, whatever it is, right? And that's the situation today in our industry. Now, for other things, if you're an agricultural company and you have a number of, hectares of land or acres of land that you have to monitor, you're going to find ways to do this, right? You're going to send someone to go see how tall the corn is, right? You're going to, use some sensors in your harvesting equipment. You're going to find ways to collect data about what's happening. It's going to be incomplete and it's going to be very expensive. The thinking here is super simple, is once we are remapping the entire surface of the planet every single day in high resolution, we don't have the opportunity cost. For anybody that wants daily data, we can serve them the data, right? Essentially out of a catalog, right? And once you do that, you basically start reaching, near zero marginal cost for delivering data to customer, right? Like very similarly to what we have in a SaaS company or in any internet service, right? Where serving a new customer doesn't really carry with it, the decision of not serving other customers, right? You don't have to pick who you serve. Once you're in that point, you can actually start replacing a lot of these other means of data collection that are less efficient, like sending helicopters and drones and so on, right? And That's the thesis at the bottom of why we argue this is a total addressable market that's north of $140 billion that we can address with the technology that we have, that no other satellite company is in a position to go after.
So on the topic of sensors and cameras, there's, you have a bunch of different modalities in terms of what's possible. And we don't have to go through all of them today. That's kind of beyond the remit of this conversation, but there's multispectral, hyperspectral, SAR, optical, et cetera, et cetera. Can you explain for the audience who's not familiar where you sort of sit and what types of sensors and cameras that you are specialized in and developing and currently flying on orbit, operating on orbit?
Yeah, or our workhorse is, our main payload is a sub-meter resolution optical camera. So it's a 70 centimeter resolution, what is called multispectral camera that takes images in red, green, blue, and near infrared, right? And this is really good to do object identification, to do classification, right? To understand what's happening in the ground. The sub-meter resolution gives you the granularity that you need to see stuff that is happening at a human scale, right? I tend to joke that, there's a reason we call a meter, right? Particularly, for those of us that still rely on the metric system, but there's a reason for it, right? Because that's actually the scale at which human activity happens, right? So sampling the world at sub-meter resolution really allows you to see small objects, small cars, small boats, individual trees in a plantation, building and construction work, heavy machinery, the kind of infrastructure like roads and so on. So this is the kind of things that you want to monitor on a daily basis, right? On top of that, we have another sensor, which is a hyperspectral camera. That is a sophisticated way of saying, you can slice now the spectrum of visible light into more than just 4 bands. And we can collect, instead of red, green, blue, and near infrared, with a hyperspectral camera, we can collect up to 30 bands of the spectrum. And that gives you some understanding of the chemical and molecular processes of what you're looking at. So really good for things like water quality or plant health, right? And the kind of things that you might want to monitor, for example, for environmental monitoring and to monitor climate change, right? To a large extent, there's a lot of interest in the world around hyperspectral, but to a large extent, we still consider this to be kind of an experimental payload, in the sense that the market for it is not so well developed. Customers still don't know exactly how to use it. And we do believe there's a lot of value there, but this value will need to be shown and over time, right? But we're collecting.
Especially as it relates to commercial customers, right? I hear all the time that, especially with going beyond just, imagery, there isn't a familiarity or the in-house teams, that sort of thing, or any sort of, there's just no inherent ability or capacity to understand like the value of this and how to work with it. Whereas governments, of course, defense and intelligence and civil, like they've been, operating some of this hardware and they're just much more familiar with it. And there's that competency is already there. So the value prop is much more clear. Do I have that right?
Totally. Look, 100%. Like, look, for commercial customers in general, what I would say is, your customers, they don't care if you're collecting data in SAR or in optical or, in hyperspec. Like, they care about, the problem you're going to solve for them and how you can solve that problem, right? And what we find is, the data is not enough, right? Like, we are a data provider. A lot of times we have to sit down with our commercial customers, and help them figure out what they can do with data and how they can use this data, right? And over time, we expect there need to be developed a very large ecosystem of value-added companies that will take the kind of data that we create, both optical and, with both multispectral and hyperspectral, if you want, and turn it into answers to questions for, this addressable market in the commercial sector to really flourish, right? On the defense and intelligence side, you're correct. I mean, they have been flying this technology, let's say, in drones and in manned, aircraft for a while. They have their own internal teams that know how to analyze the data, the kind of data, and they know what to do with it. So that's obviously a market both for optical imagery and for multispectral and hyperspectral. I think it's clearly a better known market, well-developed market, and there's obviously immediate opportunity.
Yeah. I think that's pretty fascinating that a lot of companies like yourself and, some of your peers, it seems to me that a current focus is staffing up on sort of sales and marketing to be able to go after those commercial markets that are non-existent, at worst, or very, less mature at best, I would say. Is that does that reflect your strategy? And we can talk about going public later, but just in terms of like, as you're at this point in the company, is that a focus? Like sales and marketing?
I don't think that it's a question of doing more sales and marketing to really get to the commercial customers, right? I think our vision is that to get to the commercial customers, you need to be able to deliver the data at the right price point first. Then you need to be able to deliver the solutions on top of the data at the right price point, right? But it starts with the data. If the data collection is not at the right price point, there's just huge swaths of the market that you're just not going to be able to go after, no matter how good the solution is, right? And no matter how good your marketing and sales are, right? Like if you're delivering a product to farmers around the world and it costs them more to monitor their fields than what they're expecting to get out of it, right? It's just not going to pay. Yeah. There's no market, right? You need to be able to deliver that product at the right price, right? And I think that's the biggest bottleneck here. That's why we say a lot of the commercial market starts to be viable once you remap the Earth every week at some resolution, right? Because at a weekly cadence, agriculture, forestry, insurance, commodity trading, infrastructure monitoring for energy, these things start to make sense once you can deliver the data at the right price point every single week to the customers, right? So our focus today in terms of sales and marketing is, on one hand, we're working very closely with the existing Earth observation market, which is mostly defense and intelligence, right? This is the US allies around the world, delivering data for basically monitoring for defense and intelligence applications, right? This is most of the existing markets. On top of that, yes, there are some commercial applications where the price point is right today to do at a certain scale, right? And I would argue this is probably today still kind of a Fortune 1000, realm of certain applications that still make sense and where the price points at which we can deliver the data today make sense for these customers, right? And of course, we are the lower cost supplier of data, so we can expand this a little bit more because of our data points. But as long as you have this opportunity cost of pointing satellites, right, you're still going to have to choose which customers you serve, right? And that limits a lot of what you can do. Then, on top of that, we have been working a lot with what I would call kind of a second tier of countries around the world that have been historically priced out from being able to have their own Earth observation capabilities. And because of our unit economics, because of the capacity of constellation we have out there, today with 26 satellites in orbit, we have the largest fleet of high resolution imaging satellites in the world, but also by far the largest data collection capacity, right? In terms of square kilometers that we can collect, it's probably, more than the rest of the industry combined, right? And so with that capacity at that cost, we can offer kind of an entry point for all these countries that have been historically priced out from having their own capabilities to suddenly be able to have their own national programs. And that's kind of the other focus for us today in terms of sales and marketing, right? On the wider commercial market, our strategy is continue to build up our constellation, open access to our platform, and start to see that traction as we start hitting the point where we get weekly remaps of the Earth, right? Hopefully in the next 12 to 18 months.
I think the opportunity cost, the unit economics, and then also, you haven't said it, but essentially, economies of scale as you build out a constellation. I think that discussion is fascinating. We're going to take a quick break, and then I want to ask you about tech tailwinds. Time for a short break to hear about our sponsors again. Space is the new frontier for cybersecurity. Spider Oak Mission Systems builds space cybersecurity solutions for civilian, military, and commercial space operations. Their orbit secure protocol delivers zero trust security to zero gravity environments, protecting space communication, command, control, data transmission, storage, and integrity at the data level. To learn more about how zero trust architectures will revolutionize security in new space, download the new NSR Spider Oak sponsored white paper titled Space Cybersecurity, Current State and Future Needs. You can find that white paper at spacecyber.com, and that's spacecyber.com, easy link to remember. Or check out their website at spideroak-ms.com and tell them Pathfinder sent you. Okay, we are back. And as I mentioned, I want to talk about tech tailwinds. Last time we spoke, I think you really shaped my thinking. You know, there's all these canonical examples of what has enabled businesses like yours. One being the hardware, the miniaturization, that sort of thing. But you ran through like a list of all these different things that basically make your business possible. And their, you know, technology changes. So can you run through those, like the trends, everything? And I'll get us started. You know, everyone knows this one, like launch cost dropping. But let's go from there.
So that's super interesting. And it's not so much launch cost dropping. That's a part of it, but it's also a standardization of launch interfaces, right? Is the fact that a decade ago, if you want, launch interfaces started to get standardized, right? And it was the SPAC ports on one side, but it was also the CubeSats and the CubeSat form factor and all the deployers for CubeSats, that started to allow people to kind of put together a satellite and then find where they were going to launch it, right? And on top of that, launch cost, particularly over the last couple of years, I would say, up until then, kind of launch costs had been in the realm of $10,000 per kilogram as a lower limit for a long time, right? But, SpaceX, and when they started their rideshare program, like basically brought this down to around half of that, which is, pretty amazing. Yeah. And definitely that has an effect, right? But I would say this is the first trend, right? Standardization of launch interfaces and launch cost dropping, like availability of launch, obviously a necessity. Right? On top of that, I would say computer-aided design, computer-aided, testing, computer-aided engineering, definitely a requirement here in a sense, right? For us to, we can design a satellite in a time that, that is very, very short compared to traditional satellites. And a lot of that is because we're using a lot of tools, right? To be able to make sure.
What does that look like today? How long does it take to make a satellite end to end?
To design a new generation of our satellites, it takes us around 9 months, right? End to end for a new generation.
Most people are familiar with some, that's a very quick development cycle when talking about space.
Yeah. And look, for the first 3 satellites that we did, right, with completely different models, first 3 prototypes that we did a completely new model every 9 months, right? This was back in 2012, 2013, 2014. And so that's, that allows you to, we don't have to go back to doing full environmental tests. And I'll give you an example. We have so much data now about our satellite operations and our models that we don't do thermal vacuum testing anymore.
Yeah.
We haven't done thermal vacuum testing in our satellites for several generations now because we have our models so well, so well done now that we don't have to. We know what the result is going to be, right? And so that really limits a lot, reduces a lot of the time. Then on top of that, you have, of course, we couldn't be doing what we're doing if we weren't supported by the whole supply chain of commercial electronics, right? And just the stuff that's built for, cell phones and laptops and so on, right? Like we're drawing very, very heavily from that, but also now from the automotive industry and some of the stuff that's being built for kind of autonomous cars and so on. So we're drawing very heavily from there too, right? And these are trends that kind of go well beyond what the aerospace industry is doing in itself, right? On top of that, and on top of that, I think the other one is, to me, is this revolution from 2012 until now of machine learning and AI and so on, and because you can say I'm going to go and remap the entire surface of the Earth every day, right? But if you have to put people to look at every pixel, that's just not going to scale the way you want, right?
It's impossible.
So we're drawing heavily from that to be able to say, okay, we scan the Earth every single day. Then we can run algorithms on top, and we can, see the stuff that actually people needs to go and look at.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned other trends the last time we spoke, but I think these are some of the most important.
No, that hit on everything. And we didn't talk about this last time, but I do want to ask about it. What are the biggest bottlenecks? Is it, I mean, processing, we talked about processing power. We've talked about, increasing resolution, imaging capabilities, that sort of thing. The hardware costs dropping to a point that it is feasible to, hit this critical mass of satellites on orbit, and thus, not have to choose where to point them. What are the I don't know, what are the biggest constraints? Is it like downlink? Is it ground? Like, I'm just curious, like what still needs to be developed more in the coming years, not just for you, but for commercial space writ large?
I think the biggest constraints continue, the first one I would say is energy availability, like power availability in orbit, right? It's like that's always constrained,
okay.
Right? Like it's both mass, it's real estate in the satellites, right? It's cost for the batteries and solar panels, right? It's, how much energy you have available, right, to play with. That's obviously always a constraint, right? And in the end, it really is how much value per joule you can generate, right, in orbit, and it goes down to that, and you can measure it that way. On top of that, related to that, I think I would talk about downlink capacity. That's both related to energy availability in orbit. It's also related to ground infrastructure, right? How you bring the data down, how that needs to evolve over time, right? With, remapping the Earth every week at sub-meter resolution, we'll be generating around 280 petabytes of data every year that we need to break down. Right?
Yeah.
When we're doing daily, and we increase the resolution from 70 centimeters down to 40 centimeters, now you're talking about 20 times that, right? And how you bring all this data down, obviously big challenge.
What will your constraint in terms of the quality of resolution that you'll be able to sell in 5 years from now? Is it going to be a technological problem, or is it going to be limited by regulation? And just to add a clarification there, like obviously, like the US, limits the quality that you can sell. Like there is a limit, and the licensing process has been tweaked to encourage or to accommodate the reality that foreign competitors are selling better resolution, but also just accommodating the reality of just sensors getting better. So yeah, just to sum up the question, what are you going to be rate limited by like how good your sensors are, or is it going to be just by regulation and the sensitivity that comes with selling commercial imagery?
I think you have to distinguish between two use cases here. One is using satellites to revisit specific points of interest as fast as you can, right? And this is particularly useful for defense, for example, and in those cases, you want to get as much resolution as you can, right? It's like, defense customer will pay for it, doesn't matter how much it costs. And this kind of the barrier here is, okay, how can you make this cost efficient, but also it's about regulation, right? It's what are you allowed to capture? What are you allowed to sell, right? And that's the main, driver there is how, yes, I mean, if to collect at 10 centimeters of resolution, you have to do it from low Earth orbit at 400, 500 kilometers, you have to put a very, very large aperture, right? And that would mean a very expensive satellite in a sense, right? And those are the, $2 billion spy satellites that people is building, right? And I don't see a company like us going into doing that, right? Like there are other ways of trying to get there, right? You could fly your satellites really, really low in very low Earth orbit to try to get, high resolution. And that makes sense, right? And there's other trade-offs, of course. If satellite would live less, you have to refuel it in orbit, like there's constraints, right? But I think that's going to be developed over the next 5 years, right? The capacity to go and capture very, very high resolution data for specific point targets, and do it frequently. that's going to be developed. We have technology that can be adapted to do that, but where we excel is in remapping the entire surface of the Earth, right? And remapping the entire surface of the Earth, the limitation is a little bit different because every time you double the resolution, you increase by 4 times the amount of data that you have to download and then the amount of data that you have to process, right? And in the end, there are sweet spots all the time at, what can you actually see in the imagery versus what's the cost of operating the infrastructure in orbit to remap the entire planet, right? Today, I think those sweet spots for us give us, this 70 centimeter weekly remap of the Earth as the first spot. And the next one for us is daily remaps of the entire planet down to 40 centimeters of resolution.
Okay.
I think once you hit that, we're really going to have to look at the market and how the market is developing to see where that goes next, right?
So we're already touching on it. The next segment here is going to be, I would say, kind of described as like sovereignty, geopolitics. And I also do want to get to markets, but this question's out of left field, but I want to ask it before I forget. This is a conversation about Earth observation, remote sensing, but I do have a question about launch because you are a customer. There's been a lot of talk recently that the like smallsat, CubeSat, like dedicated like vehicles that market is oversupplied, and that there's just not enough demand out there for all of the various vehicles that are in development or even in the market. Do you have any thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, of course, I have thoughts. Now, how relevant they are to your listeners, I don't know. But my thoughts are, from my perspective, there's not much use for small launch platforms, right? There is specific use cases for small launch platforms, like, for example, responsive space. I think it's really a clear use case, right? You want to put something in orbit in 2 days and you want to do, you have the satellite and the shelf and you want to put it in particular orbit, right? And I think there is a use case there that makes sense. Now, the market for that, there might be big bucks every time you do that because your customers will pay a lot for it, but it's a limited number of customers around the world and it's a limited market, right? I think for, deploying constellations of satellites, those small launchers make very little sense.
Yeah.
You want to be talking at least of, vehicles with the capacity to put a ton in orbit, to kind of start talking about something that starts to make sense from the point of view of constellations, particularly because if you see kind of where constellations are going, the range at which we are, 40, 50 kilograms up to 150 kilograms, I think you're going to be seeing that's kind of the range at which people are building, most of the useful technology, right? And so to put several of those in a plane, you need a launch vehicle that's capable of at least a ton to orbit. Right?
Yeah.
So I think a ton to orbit, 2 tons to orbit, there is a market there. There's a few, of course, players that are going after that. And then obviously, I think that there's a really big market once you start having, large launch vehicles, Starship coming online and so on. I think there's going to be significantly larger market opportunity on putting those payloads in the end in the right places, right? Being through tugs or through propulsion systems or other ways of actually going and distributing all that mass into the right places in orbit.
Yeah.
Small launch vehicles, I tend to agree, maybe kind of an entry point for companies to develop proof of concept and develop technologies that works and so on, but they have to outgrow that pretty quickly. And I think you're seeing that in the small launch vehicle market, right?
Yeah. I actually have like space tugs in my notes of what I would want to ask about Starship too, but we'll have to save that for part 2 because I want to move on to some other important topics. And one of the, I'm just going to say 3 letters and let you unpack it. A DSC. Tell us what that is. Tell us what it means and how it speaks to what you're doing differently at Satellogic or new opportunities, let's say, that you're opening for customers or countries.
A DSC for us, we call a dedicated satellite constellation, a DSC, which is basically a way of packaging the capacity that we have in orbit so that our national governments can consume it in a way that's, that's good for them, right? And what it is basically is it allows one of our customers to get exclusive access to a number of our satellites on top of a particular area of interest, right? So let's say you are, small country, you want to monitor agriculture, we want to monitor your water infrastructure, you want to monitor your borders. Now you can, instead of having to build and launch your satellite, instead of buying a satellite, what you can do is you can access the service where you buy access to a number of our satellites, like 12 of our satellites over your territory. And you can use them as if they are your own. You own the data they generate, you own the tasking. It gives you the capacity, to be kind of completely flexible that way. You download the data in your ground station, you process it, you own it, right? It gives a country the ability to basically start operating their own Earth observation capacity in a service model.
Yeah,
it's kind of the cloud computing equivalent of Earth observation, right?
Yeah.
It's instead of going and building your own data center, right? You access the cloud, right? And this is the same. Instead of building your own satellites, just access our infrastructure and you take from it what you need, right? At the way that you need it. But instead of making a large CapEx investment up front, you're paying a service on a monthly or yearly basis.
Yeah.
Right? And that's, we can do this because of our unit economics, because we're putting all the satellites in orbit, right? Because we have all this excess capacity. We are in a position, in a similar way as, Amazon started, selling AWS because they had all this excess capacity, right? That, they had the data centers prepared for, peak consumption. And I don't know, in the holiday season, right? And the rest of the year, they had all this available capacity, right? We are in a sense in a similar position. We have all this, satellites out there that are designed to go and collect data very, very frequently and to remap the Earth, right? And this gives us a lot of excess capacity that we can put in the hands of customers at a really, really good price point, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating because even the U.S., space superpower, that NASA's changing how it's going from an owner operator to procuring a lot of these commercial services off the shelf. Of course, the U.S. still has a lot of their own assets, and so that won't change anytime soon. But a lot of these like newcomers to space, like there's so many space agencies that have been started in recent years, and I think that's a really interesting opportunity. How does this topic relate to Ukraine and the work that you are doing in well, not in Ukraine, I guess I would say over Ukraine?
Yeah. So we have been, of course, monitoring. We have a very large daily collection deck over Ukraine and the surrounding areas. We have been delivering data to Ukrainian government. We have been delivering data to allies and NATO countries of what's going on in Ukraine. We also put a lot of data out there in a partnership with Austria that we did for humanitarian organizations.
We'll link to that in the show notes.
And that's humanitarian organizations working on the ground can access situational data on a daily basis, right? On top of that, our DSC model really adapts very, very well to a situation like this, right?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of parties around the world that suddenly say, hey, we really need a lot of tasking capacity on top of the Ukraine and surrounding areas, right? And of course, if you look at the existing satellites out there, right, they're all already spoken for, right? Like, Airbus, you're not going to be accessing tasking capacity in Airbus satellites over the Ukraine anytime soon, right? It's just a lot of, other people that are higher than you on the queue, right? Same thing with Maxar satellites, it's honestly, that's the truth, right? And and for us, because we're not tied to any national government, right? We're not from that perspective, our infrastructure is not licensed by the US, right? It's not licensed by France. So we have all this available capacity there. And we're able, through a DSC program, we're able to put it in the hands of the groups, including the Ukrainian government, that want to be able to task their own satellites, right? Figure out where they want to point to, right? Everybody can get data, from their allies, right? And the US is doing a really good job of, sharing the data that they collect over Ukraine with their allies, right? But in the end, the ones who decide where they're pointing the satellites, is the US, right?
Of course.
And maybe Ukraine wants to point the satellite somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where a capacity like this helps.
Yeah. So while we're on the topic of, I'd say, space sovereignty, where do you sit as, and this is such a American centric question, classic, I'm being a classic American here, but I mean, you set up a US subsidiary. What was the rationale behind that?
Well, we have a subsidiary in the US called Satellogic North America that is FOCI and mitigated ready, which basically means it's a proxy and firewall from the rest of the company, so it can serve the US government directly, and it can work directly, with soon security clearance work directly with the US government.
Mhm.
The reason to do that is, we are not a US company. Our infrastructure is built and operated from outside of the US, but we understand that the capacity that we have in orbit and that we will be putting in orbit over the next few years is really useful also to the US government, right?
Yeah.
And so we are really trying to figure out what's the best way of putting this capacity in the hands of the US government, and the local subsidiaries really, what allows us to do that, right?
Yeah.
Outside of the fact that we're not a US company, we're completely aligned in terms of geopolitics and strategically to Western values and to the US and its allies, right? So it's a very, very natural step for us. It's just finding the right way to put this capacity that we have in the hands of the US.
You're not a US company. You are listed, however, on a US exchange. So you went public through a SPAC merger, reverse merger. Hindsight's 2020. The whole market, any sort of growth stage tech company, chances are they're not really doing well right now, just given the drawdowns. Would you have changed anything as it relates to your decision and the timing to pursue a SPAC, or are you happy with that decision?
No, I think I wouldn't change anything. I think I'm happy with the decision. Taking the company public at the moment we did gave us the resources that we needed to continue to roll out our satellites, to roll out our constellation, to serve our customers. It helps us increase our reach. It gives us a nice platform to continue to grow. Obviously, if we were in a situation where we needed to go and raise money now again in the market, right? The fact that the stock is trading below where it started and so on, it would be hard for us. But luckily, we're not in a position where we need to do that.
Yeah.
We're in a position where we have enough levers in our company to manage our costs, to manage our expenses, and we are generating revenues. And so we're not in a position where we need to, desperately go and raise money again. So, we can wait in a sense until the market, comes back to its senses and starts to embrace growth that companies again, which will happen. And I think, timing the market is always a losing proposition, right?
Yeah,
So,
totally.
So for us, it's like, this is the right tool for us to go and put the company in the next stage. And so we're fully embracing that.
I'm sure it's less fun for you going out to raise money versus like working on product and company strategy and everything. So I'm sure it was helpful in that regard. We can move on from SPACs, but I'm going to stay on like a not very fun topic, but like with supply chain issues, inflation, are you seeing that affect your business in a meaningful way?
Inflation, not so much. Supply chain issues, are make our lives more difficult for sure. I mean, particularly because we're building we're setting up to build 100 satellites per year, right? That for satellites is a very large number.
Yeah.
But, in terms of building stuff in the world, right? When you're competing with the automotive industry, right? And your supply chain for commercial electronics, right? Obviously 100 of something, it's just not enough to put you really, really high in the priority of some of the suppliers, right? So that causes some pain. I mean, our team is working super hard. We have not faced any delays because of supply chain issues so far, and we don't expect now. I mean, we had been accumulating a lot of the long lead items that we need to build our satellites in. We're not seeing anything that makes us think that this will have an immediate impact in terms of rollout plans.
Yeah.
In terms of costs, of course, eventually inflation will hit all of this. This components, right? We haven't seen it yet, but
inflation comes for everybody,
right?
And I would imagine too that the vertically integrated aspect helps mitigate supply chain issues
a lot, right? I mean, this is obviously not the main reason why we became vertically integrated. We became vertically integrated to really hit our unit economics, right? To really be able to build the satellites at a really low cost, right? But a good side effect is that yes, we don't depend on suppliers of the aerospace, smallsat aerospace industry that have their own supply issues, right? And controlling your production, controlling every subassembly, controlling every component that goes into our satellites, and it really gives us a lot of flexibility, right? If we have to change a component because of a supply chain issue, we can go and redesign and change a component, right? And we have done that over the last year to address some supply chain bottlenecks. It's a really nice tool, right? I think this is one of the really good things that SpaceX done in launch, right? And vertical integration gives them a lot of tools to do what they do. It's a long road to become a vertically integrated company. But once you are, it gives you a very significant advantage.
You reap the benefits.
Yeah.
We're pushing up on time here, so we're just going to close out with some lighter questions. And the first one I want to ask you is, what is your hottest take or most contrarian view on the future of space or the space industry?
I don't know, contrarian, but my hottest take is, I would say the following. I think space industry or the economy in space is going to be a match over the next 100 years, to the economy we have today on Earth.
Okay.
So if we have $100 trillion economy on Earth today, I actually see the reasons why over the next 100 and 120 years or so, we will have to reach a point where the economy in cislunar space, let's say, matches roughly what we have today on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And that idea that we're at the beginning of building something that will support, building the infrastructure that will support an economy that's the size of Earth, that will be happening outside of the planet, I think it's really one of the things that excites me most about this industry.
Yeah. On numbers, I don't know if we'd be exactly aligned, but I think we take that view as well at Payload directionally about the inflection point, the long-term growth.
With more time one day, I'll walk you through the numbers. And
Yeah. We'll save it for part 2. I met one of your kids on Zoom last time we talked. Do you think that your kids will work in space? Or I don't know how many kids you have, but
I have one daughter. She's 5 years old, Asia. And the other day, it's a beautiful age. The other day, she came to me and she said, "When I grow up, I want to build satellites like you."
Awesome.
And for me, it was like awesome. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm in Buenos Aires now with her. Next week, I'm taking her to our pilot plant in Uruguay, and I'm gonna put her to work. See what she can do.
There you go. There you go. That's actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that. I think it's, for me at least, it's pretty powerful that you built this company out of Buenos Aires, and space very much is still like really concentrated in major economies in the global north. What would your career advice be to someone from like the global south, or from from I don't know, like a non super wealthy country who like wants to go into aerospace? What would your advice be for them, and maybe students, for breaking into the industry?
Look, I think the single most important thing that you can do when starting any business is try to develop your own perspective, right? I mean, it's easy to kind of, see what's happening around you and say, okay, I can do that. I'm going to go and do that, right? So I'm going to go and build, I don't know, today you say, okay, oh, look at all these cool Earth observation companies, right? I can do that. I can go and build another Earth observation company.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to completely miss the boat if you do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing that you need to do typically is develop like a perspective that is your own, right? I was super lucky in the sense that I came from the IT industry, right? I came from security, I came from software, right? And when I started looking at space, I just couldn't believe that satellites were so expensive. There was no way to convince me that a satellite should be that expensive, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the driving force behind making satellites that are 1,000 times less expensive, right? It's like, I couldn't be convinced that you had to actually put that money to put something in orbit, because I was coming from a different perspective, right? And I think anywhere in the world you are, developing your own perspective is really what allows you to see the same things that other people are seeing and maybe take a different path, right? Today, I think all of these trends that we discuss, rapid manufacturing, computer-aided design, global supply chains, the availability of launch means you can do this from anywhere in the world, right? But in the end, what you have to know is you're always going to have to travel to where your customers are, right? And you're going to have to sit next to them, because that's the one thing that you can't do from afar. You have to be close to your customers, but the rest you can do anyway.
There's a lot to say for part 2, space tugs.
Thanks, Ryan.
Alrighty, y'all, that is it for Pathfinder 0012. Hopefully you enjoyed diving down the EO rabbit hole, and stay tuned for more from us soon. We'll continue going deeper and deeper down that hole. Pathfinder is powered by Payload, a modern space media brand. And while we have designs on becoming the largest space content company in the galaxy, for now, we publish an industry-leading newsletter, this podcast, and a few other weekly and monthly newsletters. If you like what you heard, subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this and leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps. As always, feel free to reach out to me directly at ryan@payloadspace.com with feedback and constructive criticism, or your own financial projections on where the space economy will be 100 years from now. You can also follow me on Twitter at Ryan Doofy. Doofy spelled Doofy, and that's not my legal name. But that will do it for today. I'm Ryan Duffy signing off, and I'll see you back here next week.